If you happen to be the Walt Disney Company, or your name happens to be Bob Iger, then you've probably had a pretty rough week. It began here on October 30th when Disney announced that they would be canceling the 2024 release of Snow White's live-action remake starring Rachel Zegler, hiding behind the guise of the SAG-AFTRA strikes, which we immediately recognized seemed a bit odd, considering that this movie was being announced to be moved 5 months before it was originally slated to release. It seems like there was quite enough time in there to smooth over these SAG-AFTRA strikes and have everything ready to go for promotion beginning in, say, February for this film that didn't release until late March. And then, of course, there was the cryptic picture that came with that announcement, showing 7 animated dwarves, CGI, that nobody had ever seen before. Disney had given no hint that this was going to be anything other than the original live-action photography we saw some months earlier. Then, of course, there was the Nightmare Fuel that released on Marvel Studios. An inside source, or seemingly maybe several inside sources, came forward to Variety magazine, chronicling just how much of a mess it is inside the management of the multi-billion-dollar MCU. And all that coming out just a few days before the expected bomb of the Marvels, a movie that many industry analysts and exhibitioners are looking at to turn in a result that is somewhere at the bottom of the MCU barrel, or could very well be the worst MCU box office since inception. And of course, for the last week, we've had Gina Carano piling on top of all of this with several tweets. We're going to cover all these later today in the live show. And just for good measure, Daily Mail followed up its article on November 2nd, showing that Snow White was indeed canceled and rescheduled for 2025 due to massive reshoots, something coming on top of an already reported $300+ million production expense. We covered that in a video yesterday. Make sure you go back and check that out before the live show today at 6 p.m. Eastern. All of this seems to be coming at a perfect moment, the perfect storm for Disney, if you will, leading into the fourth quarter earnings call on Wednesday, November 8th. We'll be covering that live as well, right here on Valiant Renegade, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. This earnings call will mark the conclusion of the fiscal year of 2023 for the Walt Disney Company. Now, in the past few weeks, they have put out new financial data, recasting, as it were, the financial data from the previous 12 months or the previous 4 quarters leading into this one to match a new direction that Bob Iger is taking with the organizational structure of Disney itself. For the first time, breaking out things like ESPN and live sports, and now having the streaming segment relegated only to Hulu and Disney+. They're even breaking out actual theatrical rental revenue coming in quarter over quarter, something we haven't seen from Disney before now. And with all of the chaos in the media, it seems little doubt that there is one man who stands to benefit from all of this. Nelson Peltz is back, making another push for Walt Disney Company board seats, now with a reported $2.5+ billion worth of Walt Disney Company voting shares. Peltz, of course, has been rather upset with the Walt Disney Company, getting away from its roots, getting away from profitability, going in the wrong direction, spending too much money, getting engaged in political battles that an entertainment company like Walt Disney should never be engaged in. And it seems inarguable that with all the data that we've seen in the past 2 years, since we've been tracking this, that Bob Iger's hands are all over it. He's been all over it from the beginning. The direction that Disney has gone has been virtually all on him. And while Nelson Peltz a year ago wasn't necessarily seeking to terminate Bob Iger, I wonder if things have changed in the last 12 months, particularly since the summer when it was announced that Bob Iger would be once again renewed and extended as Disney CEO. No longer would he be leaving in January of 2025, as was promised when they brought him back in November of 22. No, now he's contracted to stay on through the beginning of 2027, or January 1st of that year. And of course, as we've reminded folks many times, if you read the Securities and Exchange Commission filing carefully enough, you'll find that even after January 1st of 2027, Bob Iger gets to hang around an additional 5 years under an agreement that makes him an advisor under contract. So Bob Iger really isn't leaving until January 1st of 2032. So if Nelson Peltz could be considered a beneficiary of all of this media chaos, then who would be helping Nelson Peltz perhaps obtain this information and help push things along in the media just 3 days before the Walt Disney Company's next earnings call? Well, it's right there in the title of this article from the Wall Street Journal that we covered about a week ago. Ike Perlmutter. Ike Perlmutter, who was once the chairman of Marvel at Disney, because Ike Perlmutter was the man who sold the Marvel empire to Disney for $4 billion back in 2009. Ike Perlmutter would certainly still have access to a lot of friends and former co-workers inside Marvel that are probably more than happy to let Ike know what's going on inside. And being that Ike was there so long and in a civil war with Kevin Feige, that Kevin Feige was the victor, thanks to Bob Iger taking his side, I don't think Ike Perlmutter needs a whole lot of leaks coming his way to know and figure out exactly what's happening, not only inside Disney at Marvel, but in the rest of the studios as well, places like Pixar, Walt Disney Animation, even Lucasfilm. And with Ike Perlmutter having thrown his shares behind Nelson Peltz, or at least his voting proxy on those shares, to boost Peltz's position to the strong place that it is now, 3 to 4 times stronger than he was a year ago, it seems a foregone conclusion that there may not even be a proxy fight this time around to be had or negotiated away. You see, with as much voting power as Peltz now has, he'll be able to vote his way right in. Or at least that's one theory. I think the best thing the Walt Disney Company board of directors could do at this point is to come to terms with the fact that Peltz will be on this board, and as well maybe a second board seat from Peltz's try-in, maybe one of his kids, as he hinted at last year. People have talked about perhaps Ike Perlmutter himself, although at 80 plus years old, I don't see Perlmutter wanting to get in on the board action, and like I've said before, he doesn't need to be. His wisdom will be in that boardroom, whether he physically is or not. So we either have to presume that Ike Perlmutter has his hand in some of these leaks, especially the big one to Variety magazine about Marvel Studios, and perhaps several others as well. Or we can believe that there are so many folks inside the Walt Disney Company that are so fed up with this once great entertainment studio's trajectory that they're coming out of the woodwork now to try to spill the beans on what's really going on. They want the truth out there because it may be the only thing that can save them. But then again, these leaks could be a combination of those factors. And we'll discuss that more in depth, again, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, Sunday, November 5th, right here on Valiant Renegade on the live show. We hope to see you there. Until then, take care. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.